Yeah.
Not real loud, but I hear you.
Yeah.
There we go.
We are now connected.
Let me know when we're ready.
We are ready.
We're ready. All righty. Greetings to everybody. It's good to be with you today. And let's continue our discussion on church history. We've been looking at many aspects of it. And again, I hope you have your outline. If you do, please, we're on outline page 20, talking about the results of persecution. And let's start with a word of prayer. Lord, we love you. We thank you once again for the opportunity to study your word and these different things in history. We ask that you would help us to receive it, to understand it. Help me, God, to make it clear. Anoint your servant. Use it to your glory. We ask it all in the mighty name of Jesus. Amen. All right, so we left off on our last session with talking about what we talked about, persecution of the church. We talked about, no, I'm sorry, we were getting into persecution of the church. We left off talking about the early heresies that were involved. The early heresies. I believe we did. We're going to start today with early heresies. All right. Yeah, we're starting with early heresies. Okay, we're on page 14 of your outline. I apologize. So, in the post-apostolic age, a number of groups arose that separated from the mainstream church, separated from the mainstream apostolic doctrine. These groups are called heretics, and their beliefs are called heresies, okay? And we're going to discuss four of the main early groups that arose to cause division in the apostolic or post-apostolic age. Again, this was after the death of the apostles. These had already begun to rise up even while the apostles lived, but they got a stronger foothold and more followers after the death of the apostles. All right. So the first one we're going to talk about, they're called the Ebionites. The Ebionites. And these were Jewish Christians, converted Jews to Christianity. What the issue was, they wanted to hold to their Jewish culture and identity to the point that it affected their understanding of the gospel. Their Jewish traditions and customs and culture began to become more important to them than a lot of the Christian culture and aspects. These were called Ebionites. The name came from the Hebrew word for poor, as most of the early Christians were very poor. They were very poor as a group, the early Christians. So that's one of the heretical groups. The second one, and these were very powerful opponents of Christianity. They were called Gnostics, or their belief was called Gnosticism. Starts with the letter G, Gnosticism, Gnosticism. Powerful opponents of Christianity. It originated, actually, their belief in paganism. It was a combination of Oriental religion and Greek philosophy. They continued to select various ideas from different religions and blend them into theirs. They picked and choose from various religions what they liked, and they formed a religion out of it. So you can imagine and understand how popular something like that would be when you use various religions as like a buffet in a restaurant, and you take all the things that you like and you do away with all the things you don't like, and you form a religion out of that. And that's what that Gnosticism was about. It comes from the Greek word gnosis, which means knowledge. They considered themselves to be intellectuals. They were very smart. They were very bright people in forming their religion. They believed that this was a religion of the intelligentsia, the intellectuals. They organized into a religion after New Testament times, though it was in the development during the apostolic times, as witnessed in various scriptures. Scriptures deal with that teaching of Gnosticism. We read about it in several of the epistles. So that was the second one. The third group of heretics was called Marcion. Marcion was named after a man, this man named Marcion. They held to many of the Gnostic beliefs. Their basis for their religion was the belief in two gods, okay? Two gods they believed in. A creator and a redeemer, okay? That's what they believed in. And then we have a group called Montanism. Montanism. And again, this was named after a man. Though considered to be heretical by some, they adhered to many more biblical truths than their accusers. So the Montanists, although they had some heretical teaching, they were not all bad, because they adhered to a lot of the truths in Scripture, such as one God. They believed in one God. They did go to extremes in some areas, and evidence in history shows that some split away from the Montanists, and they called themselves modalists, or they believed in modalism. And this means basically, this is how we know, and they were identified because they definitely were oneness believers. That's what that word indicates, that modalism. Montanism and modalism both indicate that mono, one, meaning one God they believed in. So they had a lot of truths, but they did pull away in other areas. But those were the four major groups of heretics that caused confusion and division in the post-apostolic age. The Ebionites, the Gnostics, the Marcionites, and Montanism, okay? Now, besides heretical teaching, the early church underwent, we know, a lot of persecution, okay? It was always the question for the Christian, who were they ever going to serve, Caesar or Christ? Caesar or Christ? So Christianity has always faced both external and internal problems in every period of its history. The Jews were the first persecutors of Christians. We see that in Acts 7 and also in Acts 8, verse 13. And especially the Jewish leaders were particularly against Christianity. This was what Jesus Christ had established was an affront to their power base. Okay? So before 250 AD, persecution was mainly local, sporadic, and more often the result of mob action than the result of a definite civil policy. It was not codified into law yet to persecute Christians. It was more mob type actions that, for whatever reason, were prejudiced against Christians. After that date of 250 AD, however, persecution became at times the very studied policy of Roman imperial government, and hence widespread and very violent. During that time, Tertullian's idea that, quote unquote, the blood of Christians is seed of the church became a terrible reality to many Christians. The church continued to develop in spite of, or perhaps partly because of, persecution, until at the end of the period, it finally won freedom of worship under Constantine. Now, that sounds like a good thing, and in many aspects, that freedom under Constantine, freedom from persecution, was a good thing. However, what Constantine brought in still plagues the quote-unquote Christian world to this day, because Constantine also brought in many of the doctrines that were part of the establishing of the Catholic or universal church, that brought in many doctrines that were false doctrines that many even denominations today follow after many of those creeds without even realizing the fallacy of what they're doing, such as Trinitarianism, baptizing in titles, and so forth. And we'll get into that. But let's go into some more detail here about some of the causes of persecution. First, there was political. Political was part of the cause. The church was not persecuted much as long as it was looked at by the authorities as just being a part of Judaism. They had learned to deal with Judaism, but they were having a difficult time swallowing and understanding the belief of these Christians. And so within the Roman government, Judaism was considered a legal sect, S-E-C-T, a legal sect. They were licensed, in other words, so to speak. They were authorized under the Roman government to exist, the Jews. But as soon as the Christians distinguished themselves as a separate sect, they were looked at as a secret society. And the Roman government did not like that. So it came under the ban of the Roman state. See, when all those Christians came out of Judaism, all the Jews converted to, or many Jews converted to Christianity, they realized they were dealing with something entirely different and separated from what they considered a legal sect, the Jews. Now they were this so-called secret society. Okay, that's what they were considered. So it then became an illegal religion and considered a threat to the safety of the Roman state. See the way the devil works here. There could be no private religion. Okay, and that's what was happening with Christianity from household to household. They felt like they were having a private, secret religion. Religion could be tolerated only as it contributed to the stability of the Roman state. When a choice had to be made between Caesar and Christ, Caesar was bound to take second place, and the Roman state did not like that at all. This was perceived by Roman leaders as disloyalty to the state and to the government. They saw Christians as trying to set up a state within a state, with their leader being Jesus Christ and opposing Caesar. The exclusive sovereignty of Christ clashed with Caesar's proud claims to exclusive sovereignty. Christians refused to sacrifice on the altars of the Roman state. If one would make these sacrifices, they could practice a second private religion. But the Christians obviously refused to sacrifice on those Roman altars. So therefore, they were persecuted. So political reasons were one of the reasons or causes of the persecution of the early church. Now, a second cause was religious reasons. Religious reasons. The Roman state religion was mechanical and external. It had altars, rites, practices that people could see. The Romans were not averse to adding a new idol to the group in the pantheon, as long as that deity was subordinate to the claims of the Roman state religion. But see, the Christians had no idols to add to the pantheon. Their worship was spiritual and internal. The Romans' religion was external. They worshiped idols seen with hands, wood, stone, marble, statues, and so forth. Christians didn't do that. Romans didn't like that. When they stood praying, when the Christians stood praying with their eyes closed, there was no visible object to which those prayers were addressed. When the Romans prayed, they looked with their eyes open and prayed to idols or prayed to Caesar. So the religions clashed because their rites and their ceremonies were very opposite of each other, very different. For the Christians, the secrecy of their meetings also brought false accusations against the morality of the Christians. See, where things are unseen and unknown to unbelievers, when people don't know what's going on, so to speak, behind closed doors, they begin to imagine the worst. And so rumors would fly about what went on in these Christian meetings, in their homes, what they were doing, and so forth. These rumors began to stir persecution of a religious nature. So now we've got political persecution. We have religious persecution just because of the difference in worship and focus of worship and so forth. Then there was social persecution, which is at best what we really get today in many places, just a social persecution. Not to say that there is not open persecution in many Muslim countries and communist countries, that they physically abuse and even kill Christians. That is still going on today, Christians being martyred. But I'm saying for a large part of the world, in civilized society, the most persecution the Christian gets right now, and it's changing, unfortunately it's changing, but right now, the persecution we receive is like I'm going to mention now, which is more what we call social persecution. Christians who were sympathetic to the lower classes and slaves were hated by the influential aristocratic leaders of society. Now, I'm sure a lot of their feelings toward them and the antisocial feelings toward the Christians had to do with them having a guilty conscience because they wanted nothing to do with the lower classes of society, whereas these new Christians were taking in whosoever will, everybody, and were being merciful to the poor and the outcast and the downtrodden. That did not sit well with the religion of the Roman state. Christians upheld the equality of all people, whereas Romans were very class-minded, class structure. Okay? Paganism insisted on an aristocratic structure for society in which the privileged few were served by the lower class and slaves. A lot of slavery in the Roman Empire in these days. Christians separated themselves from pagan gatherings at temples, theaters, and places of recreation. This nonconformity to accepted social patterns brought on them the dislike and disdain that the nonconformist always faces in any period of history. If you're a nonconformist for moral or religious reasons, it brings on somewhat of a social persecution, because in adhering to certain morality, we, by the very nature, by the very fact or nature that we don't do some sin that others do, points out the sin that is being done by those people who are offended by our morality. I know it sounds crazy, but that's why, for example, today in the and I know I won't get all the letters of this correct because they keep changing it, but the LBGQT society that started out just wanting for their private reasons, they said, for a man to be able to marry a man and a woman to marry a woman, has now escalated to where you are a bigot, you are preaching hatred if you do not 100% agree with their stand of homosexuality and women marrying women and men and fluid genders and all this bizarre demonic stuff that's being preached around the world today or taught around the world. It's not just a matter of them doing it privately and us not doing anything about it, but praying for them. They want to attack anybody who also does not openly agree with it to be persecuted, right? And see, that's the difference. That's what's happening in our twisted society today. So we have political persecution back then, religious persecution, social persecution, and then finally the fourth area of persecution that we read about in history for the early church was economic persecution. Economic considerations played a part in the persecution of the Christians. Paul received opposition from the idol makers of Ephesus, for example. Okay, let's read about it to make it clear in the book of Acts. In Acts chapter 19, verses 26 through 28, it says this: "Moreover, you see and hear that not alone at Ephesus, but almost throughout all Asia, this Paul hath persuaded and turned away much people, saying that they be no gods which are made with hands." See, these are the idol makers upset that Paul is running around teaching people that, hey, don't follow and buy from those idol makers, those little idols they make. They're not gods, and they're coming and they're complaining about it to the authority. Verse 27, "So that not only this our craft or our livelihood is in danger to be set at naught, but also that the temple of the great goddess Diana should be despised, and her magnificence should be destroyed, whom all Asia and the world worship it." And when they heard these things, they were full of wrath and cried out, saying, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians." So there was even this economic persecution that began to take place, complaining that they were ruining their economy, the structure of their economy in various areas of anything pertaining to sin, any industry that thrived on sin and immorality, like prostitution, like this temple of the great Diana that they're talking about. When you study it in history, the way they worship there is men would go in and have sexual intercourse with prostitutes in Diana. That was their form of worship, you see, perverted stuff, sinful stuff. And they were feeling like that they were going to destroy their culture, these Christians that had turned people away from this way of living. This was a clue to the feelings of those whose livelihoods were threatened by the spread of Christianity. All of these considerations combined, the political, the economic, the social, and the religious, all of them combine to justify in people's mind the persecution of the Christians in the minds of the authorities. Christianity was not a licensed religion with a legal right to exist. They felt about Christians the way the Palestinians and the Iranians feel about the Jews in Israel today. They don't believe they have a right to exist, okay? That's the kind of hatred that was here toward the Christians. So, persecution of the church. Persecution of the church. Let's look at some of the things that took place. The Jews were the persecutors during the infancy of the church in Jerusalem. It really started out as being the Jews, not the Romans. It changed, but the Jews started the persecution. Only in the reign of Nero, which was in 54 AD up to 68 AD, did organized persecution begin to come from the Roman state. So let's look at some of the things that happened pertaining to persecution up to 100 AD and the death of the approximate time of the death of John the Revelator, John the Apostle John. Nero had distinction of being the first major persecutor of the Christian church, Nero. Domitian was another infamous persecutor in 95 AD. Christianity became under state ban. It was a banned religion from 100 AD all the way to 250 AD. The first organized persecutions took place in Bithynia under the governorship of Pliny the Younger. He brought Christians to court when he would find out that they're practicing Christianity. No Christians were to be sought out, but if someone accused one of being a Christian, that individual was punished unless he recanted and worshiped the Roman gods. So they had to recant their religion or they would be prosecuted. Now, universal persecution began after 250 AD. Emperor Decius took the throne about the time Rome was reaching its first millennium in her history. Rome was unstable due to external and internal attacks and natural calamities. Decius decided that if Rome's classical culture was to be saved, it would have to be with a strong arm. The Christians became his target because of their rapid growth and their seeming attempt to set up a state within a state. So this Decius really began to intensify the persecution toward the Christians. And that was after 250 AD. From 245 to 313 AD, a man by the name of Diocletian, he created a strong monarchy. He ended the diarchy of shared powers of Senate and Emperor, which was created by Caesar Augustus way back in 27 BC. So he changed the structure of their government. He felt there was no place for democratic elements or for toleration of any faiths. No toleration for any faiths. Out of this period came some of the most severe persecutions that Christians ever had to endure. If you are a reader and you want a good book to read to give you a good idea of what they would do to Christians throughout history in martyring them and killing them, the Catholic Church specifically, there's a book called, oh Lord, I had it in my mind and I just forgot the name of it, but I'll think of it in a second and I'll give you the name of it, and I do apologize. But it's a book on on all the martyrs that took place, all the martyring that took place. All right. In 303 AD, Diocletian, I got the name back again in my mind, Fox's Book of Martyrs. Foxes, Fox's Book of Martyrs. Great book. And I know there's two. There's a 1 and a 2 now. They added to it. Get the original one, at least the part 1, to get an idea of what took place from many, many years ago, centuries ago. Give you a good idea of what they were doing. I'm just talking about them doing it. This will give you good insight into what they were doing, what their methods were. And they were brutal and they were grotesque, what the Christians endured under these leaders, all right, and under the Catholic Church. In 303 AD, Diocletian ordered the cessation, or that means to stop, meetings of the Christians. He destroyed churches, imprisonment for all that would not recant their faith, and the destruction of all known scriptures and letters by fire. See, it's things like this that we have to understand is why we have, when I mentioned before, what actual pieces of information we have from this era and the apostolic era and the post-apostolic era is because you had crazy leaders like this come along, obviously led of the devil, that wanted to destroy these writings, destroy these materials. And so this is what Christians always had to deal with and fight against in trying to propagate these great truths from decade to decade and century to century. The burning of these things. Galerius came along in 311 AD. He issued an edict that gave some toleration to Christianity. It led up some of the strict, harsh persecution that was taking place. Persecution, though, did not cease completely until Licinius and Constantine issued the Edict of Milan in 313 AD. This edict brought freedom of worship not only to Christianity, but to all religions until 381 AD. Now, in our day, this same issue in America of church and state, and I don't know how it is in your nations, but this same issue of church and state has again been revived, and in many countries, Christians are tolerated only under law. Only where people are allowed to have private interests apart from public interests can there truly be religious freedom. Okay? And I'm going to pause here with this section of the lesson, and we'll pick up next session with some of the results of the persecutions. Some of the results, all right? And so we'll end there. God bless, and we will see you next session.